Okay, so welcome back. Today we're going to look at text boxes in your C# Visual Studio Windows Forms application. And we're going to look at one specific aspect of text boxes, which is being able to, when a user clicks inside the text box, grab information on what line they clicked on and do something. And we're going to use this application here as an example of why you might want to do that. This is an application that basically summarizes some events, and we've talked about these events in other videos. We talked about a frequency monitor, which is monitoring the power system frequency from your utility at the wall outlet and monitoring that over a long period of time, and when it goes outside the normal range indicating a problem, it will save a file that gives you 30 or 60 minutes worth of data showing what happened to the frequency. And what it will do is it will make files. Each time there's an event that goes outside the normal range, it will make a file in a folder and it will give you data, in this case, time value data. And then you can take that data and reproduce it later to see what happened. So what this application does is it steps through each file and makes a summary and displays that summary in this text box. So here I've got maybe 20 files for 20 events. And what it does, it says, okay, there's an event here on this date. So it's got a date and it's got a value of the frequency and a duration for how long it was beneath the normal frequency. So each one of these is a summary of an event. And using this text box, what we can do is we can say, hey, I see this event here, this file. I would like to get more information about it. So the user can click on this line in the text box and it will automatically sense, okay, the user clicked on this first line, which refers to whatever file is in here. And I will go out, grab that file and plot the data on that chart. And then you can click the next one and we'll plot that data and so on. You can go down the line and plot each one. So in order to do that, you need to have some sort of data gathered from the text box when the user clicks on it. So what we're going to do is, for example, if the user clicks on this second line, we're going to need to have a mouse click event handler associated with this text box that says whenever the user is hovering over this text box and clicks on this position, that is the line that is showing whatever file or whatever data we have internally in the application. So we're going to have a mouse click event handler that grabs the line somehow from the text box and associates that with whatever data. And then we go to this line. This is going to be line 0, 1, 2, 3. So we're going to have to figure out how to get the line index number, which is line 3, and then we can associate it in our application. Another thing you notice that when we click on a line, it automatically highlights the entire line. And one other thing that I've included here that you may not have noticed, normally with the text box, when I hover over it, this mouse cursor would be 2 vertical bars. So what I've done is I've added a line of code to say, no, I don't want vertical bars, I want an arrow like it is in other controls so that the user can sense that they're pointed on a certain line. And one last thing which is really important is, say I scroll down to the bottom of the text box and click on an empty line. If I do that, by default, this application is going to crash because it's going to say, hey, wait a minute, you clicked on a line that doesn't exist in the file or in the data, so it's going to crash. So let's take a look at our C# Visual Studio Windows Forms application and see how we can do this. So here we are in our C# Visual Studio Windows Forms application. And what we're going to do is we're going to focus on this text box down here in the lower left corner. And you can see if you go over to the properties, text box 1, the first thing we want to do is we want to generate a mouse click event handler for this. So make sure we have it selected and then go over to this lightning bolt which says events and scroll to the mouse click event, double click on that and you will get your text box 1 mouse click event handler. And if we go over to the code, it will show up in the text box 1 mouse click event. And this is the code we're going to use to figure out what line the user selected and to highlight it and to get the information. You first have to use the textbox1.selectionStart, which gets the starting point of the text selected in the text box, which means when you click on a line, it will put the cursor there, and that is seen by Windows Forms to be the starting point of a text selection. In our case, it's not going to be the starting point. The first character in that line will be the starting point, and the last character in that line will be the ending point. If we do that, it will give us a character number. So what it does is it starts from the first character of the very first line of the text box and starts counting all the characters, and by the fifth line, you're probably up to character 300 or whatever. So it's continuously counting the character number. And from that character number, that integer number, you can feed that number into a get line from character index, and it will tell you what line is associated with that character. So it's kind of roundabout, but it gives you, in the end, it will give you a line number. And that is an index. It's not a starting at line 1. It starts at line 0. The next thing we need to do is get the total number of non-empty lines in the text box. And all we have to do with that is say textbox1.lines.count, and that tells us how many lines are in the text box. The important thing now is we've got the line number, so we know what line is being selected, and we've got the number of lines. That's going to be important to say, if I click on a blank line, we'll be able to determine that because we know how many lines there are. If you clicked on a line outside of that number of lines, it's a blank line, we need to ignore it. So we've got a couple important bits of data. So the next thing we need to do is some error checking to make sure the text box isn't empty and the user hasn't clicked on an empty line. As we said, line number is the zero-based index of the line in the text box, while number of lines is the total number of lines in the text box. So what we can do is we can say, okay, if the number of lines displayed in the text box is greater than line number plus 1, again, this is a index, this line number. So to make sure that the line that you clicked on, the text box has more lines than that line that you clicked on, that's why it's line number plus 1, since this is an index, then that means you clicked on a legitimate line. If not, it will just be ignored. So then we can do our highlighting. We know what line we're on, and we can figure out the length of that line. So we can highlight the selected line by first getting the line length, how many characters in the line. So we say textbox1.lines, you feed it the line number, the index, dot length, and that says how many characters are in that line. And then what we can do is we can say, okay, I know what line I'm on, I know how many characters there are, and we want the text box to select that entire line from the selection start and use the selection length. So to get the start of that line, the first character in that line, you do textbox1 get first character index of current line. We know the current line, and that will give us the character index, whether it's 300 or 800 or whatever, of the first character in that line, and we know the length. We've already figured out the length. So now we know the selection should start at the first character, end at the last character of that line, specified by the length of the line. So that's it. At this point, we have selected the line, and now what we can do, we know the line number, we can associate that with whatever data we want to access based on that line. In our case, we want to chart whatever file data is associated with that line number. So we've got a separate method here that will take the line number and chart it. That's kind of irrelevant here, but at least we know what line number was selected, and we can go and we can operate on it. And here we're doing a points.databind and so on to actually chart it. Now the last thing, we want to change the mouse cursor to that arrow. And the only important thing here is our textbox1.cursor equals cursors.arrow. And there's a bunch of different choices, but we're just going to say we want the cursor. When you hover over that text box, we want to show an arrow cursor. And that's about it. That should be enough for you to select a line in a text box using the event handler, to select the entire line, to make sure you don't crash on selecting an empty line, and also to have the arrow. So that's about it for this one. If you're liking these videos, I encourage you to hit the like button, subscribe, hit the bell notifications. But most of all, please let others know that we're here so we get some views. Really appreciate it. Otherwise, take care. Have a really good day. Thanks.